I also like to think of it sometimes just like in reference of like the gym or like eating. You know, when you go to a trainer and if he was like, you're going to have to change everything about your life today.
Right.
Cut out everything.
Right.
The alcohol, the going out, the fast food, you would like run the opposite way or like try to find a new trainer.
Right.
And clients will go try to find a new agency.
Right.
You know what I mean? But like if you give it to them in baby steps, like first, let's just like set this to the side.
Right.
Like, let's change our social presence a little bit and then lead up, you know, over years of also building trust, you know, with the client. That can kind of like lead to change as well. Hey, my name's Alicia Harris, and this is The Invisible Thread, culture's biggest show where we finally put a spotlight on strategy, highlighting how the world's biggest brands and people become who they are and the strategic minds behind them. Today, we have one of my favorite people here with us, Jonathan Daly, Group Communication Strategy Director at Drogify, and my used-to-be manager.
Yes, that's right. I knew her when.
Applause for you.
Applause for you. Applause for you.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. I'm pumped. We were talking about this before, like the camera started rolling.
Yeah.
I'm just super stoked to see you here. Like, look at this transformation into a creator.
Yeah,
you know?
We're doing the thing.
You're doing the damn thing. You are.
So let's talk about you.
Okay.
So finding strategy.
Okay.
Hence the title of this show. Strategy really is this invisible field that's hard to get into for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just break down how you got into the field, why you got into the field, and also kind of why you chose to stick with it and make a career out of it.
Oh, big questions. How did I get into strategy? So when I finally decided I wanted to be in advertising, like when I made that choice that advertising was what I wanted to do, I knew that I wanted to be, I wasn't creative. Like, I think I am creative. I think I'm a creative thinker, but, and maybe I can sling a line of copy here and there, but like, I didn't think that pursuing the actual creation of the work was where my strengths were going to be best applied. And so when I finally started off in my career, I did an internship at like a media agency and realized that that was not for me. So when I got back to Canada, I'm Canadian. I'm Canadian, by the way. When I got back to Canada, I started at a creative agency, TWA, and as an account person, as most people do. And I encountered the lone planner in the agency, this amazing, amazing human being by the name of Steve Wright. Mm-hmm. And I thought Steve Wright was it. Like, was probably about the age I am now, which is late 30-something. We'll leave it at that. But he was like articulate. He had a command of all the facts and the faculties of what was going on. He seemed to have an innate understanding of how not only campaigns had to work, but how consumers would interact with them.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough that we got to work very directly with him because, again, I'm old. Back then, account people had to be a lot more strategic, and you had to work into your planner. And I knew that that was my end ambition.
Yeah.
Took a couple of detours in my career. Like, you bounce around agencies. I took a 5-6 year hiatus from advertising, and I went to work in international relations at a multilateral org, where I actually think I really learned how to be strategic. I had two great bosses there, David Tice and Amy Stillwell, who are on the PR side, obviously, but they're real communications professionals, figuring out like what's the objective, what are the tasks that we need to achieve, what's the single most important message or messages that we need to land, and what are the best ways that we're going to communicate those, right? So it's all the elements of strategy, just done in the context of PR and external relations. So when I moved back to Canada, I departed from that brief sojourn in PR and external relations and went back to agency land. I went back into the career field that I had when I left, which was an account person.
Yeah.
I went as an account director. And I think within 3 or 4 months, a past manager, a lady by the name of Monica Rufo, was like, you're miscast. Like, this is not, you're a good account person, but you should be doing this thing with the thinking over here. Yeah. And so my finding strategy was identifying that it was a thing I wanted to do and really applying myself as much as possible to learn as much about it and like learning by osmosis as much as possible. But like I can't really say that I found it and like barreled my way in, because there were a lot of people who helped me along the way. Whether it was inspiring me or just or like going, hey, no, do this thing instead, and making that path for me. So.
Yeah, totally. And like within your story, you kind of had those like mentors or key figures that like guided you into that path and saw that you would be great in a strategy role or a strategic role and like helped you get there.
Right.
But like for a lot of people, like that's not the case, right? Like they're in media and they're like, please get me out. Or like account.
Right.
You know what I mean? And like no shade, but it's just like, how do you, within those positions, if you don't have those mentors like looking at you and pulling you into a strategic position, how do you best like use what you're learning over there to get to strategy?
So I come down to, I think, the fundamentals of what makes, especially in the context of agencies, but I think more broadly in the context of big strategy, like grand strategy, like the strategy that you do, whether you're in a corporate strategy role, whether you're helping define an artist's brand, any of like that big capital S strategy. I think it fundamentally comes down to being useful and being in service of whatever the end objective is, right? And I think that often if you're working in media, for example, I think that sometimes it's very easy to lose yourself in reach and frequency and what's the most efficient thing and what's the tech stack look like. But you're actually there to help brands connect with people, and you're there to partner with your creative agency to help get that done. And the media person who remembers that and remembers that their job is to be a strategy is number one, nothing if it's not useful. You think that way, it's easier for you, A, to understand the things that you have to learn in order to be more useful and more effective. But B, it's also the easiest way to get noticed and create the opportunities for yourself to make those transitions, I think. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I think it is. It's just like being useful with what you have.
Yeah.
You know, and like I think the other thing is just like sitting in on as many like strategic calls as you can. Like that's not even like the whole agency, but like the ones where strategy like sits by themselves a little bit.
Right.
Or with their like managers, et cetera, or their team, but just like getting in on that process as much as possible to understand like how do frameworks come together, how are insights formed, et cetera. And then doing it yourself sometimes too.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. I think that's the other piece that I think that's exactly right. I think the other piece that a lot of people forget is strategy takes reps. It's like muscle memory. And it's less about, yes, there are boxes that you have to fill in, but it's less about filling in or checking boxes and more about an approach to solving problems, or a philosophy of how you solve problems, a philosophy of how do you form an insight, right? And so I think you're right. Sitting in those, if you're not in the discipline, sitting in those meetings, absorbing everything, like that was, I will say I was blessed as a planner, coming up when I came up as an account person, because you had to be in the room, like you absorbed a lot of it. I feel like a lot of people who are coming up right now don't have that same advantage because the industry is so siloed. So I 100% agree with you. Push your way into those rooms, as appropriate.
And even on the appropriateness of it all too, like I always talk about like strategy. Sometimes as strategists, we feel like we have to lead the ship. You know what I mean? We're just like, we're at the front of the ship and everybody's following suit. But like the best strategists, I feel like use everyone around them. And so sometimes it can feel weird being like on the media side or an account, feeling like, am I kind of like stepping on their toes?
Right.
But like strategy is about collecting all of these different people and like all these different conversations and POVs to create one beautiful one, you know, and you can't do it by yourself.
I 1000% agree. I'm not to inject politics, but like there's like, remember A&E, when A&E used to do biographies? Remember that was like so fun?
Okay, yeah.
They did this great biography of the first President Bush. And that kind of Socratic style that you described is, love the man or hate the man, or, have whatever opinions you want of his policies. But one thing I thought was really inspiring was that he was known within like the policy establishment as a president who led and was very strategic, but he listened. He always let everyone else input first. And he collected those thoughts, melded them with his own, and then said, here's what I think we should do.
Yeah.
And I've always tried to, not always successfully, but tried to emulate that style.
Yeah, for sure. I think it gets a little crazy, like taking in all of the inputs sometimes because everybody has a POV at some point. And it's like, we just have to get to this one crystallized idea, this one statement, you know? But yeah, I totally agree. Like the more you can take in and kind of like dissect that and create it into your own in a bit is like the best way that creative's like brought to life, you know?
It is.
So we've talked a little bit about like getting into strategy and kind of like some of the essential gems that strategists should know like as they're building out their own work. But now let's go into actually doing strategy in a really detailed way. So today we're going to be highlighting one of the Bud Light campaigns that you've led strategy on. So can you kind of just like walk us through in a case study format a little bit, like what was the brand and what was the impact that it had within culture? What was the challenge you guys were up against? The strategic process you went through and then kind of the creative that came out of that?
Okay. That big mouthful question.
I know, but we're going to start at the top.
We're going to start
with the brand and its role in culture.
The brand and its role in culture. So Bud Light, first of all, start at the top.
Yep.
Team sport. It was a 1,000% team sport to get to the platform we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
I think I played a pretty crucial role on the strategy piece, but definitely it was definitely a tight collaboration.
Yeah.
But the brand, Bud Light. I mean, like I think it's the number one light beer in North America right now. Huge brand, massively iconic. For better or worse, played, especially in the 70s and 80s, a very pivotal role in not just like creating perceptions of its segment and of the category, but really cementing cultural perceptions of what it meant to party. You know what I mean? Like it really defines sociability in a way that previously had been held by liquors. So it went from you're going to have a cocktail at the end of the night to you want something that's light and crisp. That you can session, you can drink all day at a baseball stadium or all day in the backyard. It really did transform the way that, as a product, a way that that Americans and North Americans spent their leisure time. And at the same time, as a brand, it changed or helped shift a lot of cultural perceptions about what people, particularly men, particularly young men, were supposed to do in those spaces, in those moments. The role of women, particularly young women, in those moments, and then you see all of the. And you can't blame this on Bud Light alone. The category, as they were, chasing each other to, have dominance in terms of both, share of throat and share of mind. They tried to outdo each other. Who can be the most macho, the most extra, the most, you get the point.
Yep. So
this all starts over a course of, 20, 30 years. Fast forward to 2015 when my bosses at Anomaly said, hey, we're going to try you out on this new assignment. The first thing that we were trying to do for the Canadian Bud Light expression was to figure out what was their new platform, what was their new core purpose for the brand, and how would that impact a creative platform that they had in the world? Would it lead to new work, or would we be able to figure out how to use this new purpose to reimagine the way that the brand was showing up in the world under that same line? The challenge, I think I pretty much articulated when we talked about the brand's role in culture. All those tropes of like, come on, guy, like girls in like bikini tops.
Yeah.
That was cool in 1980, does not fly in 2019 or 2015 at the time, rather.
Yeah. Because of a new generation.
Yeah. An evolving, more urban, more cosmopolitan demographic. A generation of younger millennials and like approaching drinking age Gen Zs who actually were not buying into alcohol culture writ large. Alcohol is declining as a category. And so if people are already like kind of like not looking at your whole category because they're losing interest in drinking itself, and then you're that girl over there being like the crazy, just like out of the box, wildly superficial brand, like you're losing in a losing category.
Yeah.
And so the challenge was how to reimagine the brand's core purpose in order to like make itself relevant with this new or changing demographic without alienating, like, you know, the large swaths of drinkers who sometimes are just like, yeah, I drink it because it's wet and has alcohol in it, and I don't really care about its values or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was the core challenge and the core job that was presented with from a strategic point of view.
Yeah.
How do we solve for a disconnect between drinkers and the brand around what they value and what mattered to them and what was important?
Yeah. So knowing that's like the challenge, where do you start, or where did you start within strategy as far as digging into that and figuring out like how to come back with a strategic POV or point of view for your clients and the creative team? Like, where do you start with the mess, you know?
You start by literally banging your head against the wall. Like, because there's beer is, and I think any beer marketer will tell you, beer is a very simple product.
Yeah.
Surrounded by very complex brands, right? And so, and brands that have like huge associations, like tons of mind share, tons of heart share. And so if you can't, the easy trick for a planner is always to go back to, oh, well, the product's differentiated in this way, so make that the thing. Make a superiority claim.
Yeah.
Make that the thing. If you're parity, technically, with every other product, then you have to go back to the brand and what's true and interesting within the brand and find a way to surface that in a way that would resonate with this, again, more urbane, more conscious consumer.
Yeah.
And so it started off by doing brand ethnography, right? Like diving into the brand and like all of that scene setting that I just did for you around the brand's role in culture. That all came out of understanding, you know, who this brand was, what it had been doing for the last 30 years, just, you know, as part of a wider category, maybe creating some tropes that were not the best. But when you get to like the core of light beer, you found something really interesting that we thought was interesting and ultimately clients thought was interesting as well, that could align with this younger, more progressive, small p progressive consumer, which is that these guys are all about moving forward in their lives. These men and women are constantly on the march. They're a lot like you, actually. They're pushing themselves. They have their job, and then they have their side hustle, and then they have their passion project, right? They're constantly trying to find ways to push themselves. They're looking to be the innovators in the space, in whatever space that they're in. And the interesting thing about Bud Light is that Bud Light was an innovation. It literally was. For, I don't know, this is where my memory fails me, but for between 1800 and 1950 something, like there was only beer, right? There was like, you know, you had a Hefeweizen, but it was all heavy, like, you know, higher ABV, higher alcohol by volume.
Yeah.
Strategists love acronyms. Higher alcohol by volume products. And scientists in the lab, looking to serve the needs of like a more suburban, more dads on the weekend kind of generation. They're like, all right, how do we give the people something that's a little bit more sessionable, that they can drink a little bit longer, that's lighter, that will not have you bleeped up.
Yeah.
Bleeped out in a couple of. And so it was born of tinkering, of people looking to make progress, to push the beer category itself forward. And so we landed on a core creative idea for the brand, its purpose or its positioning, that was built around that. This notion of being born from progress to be progressive, right?
Yeah.
So this is a beer that was born of the same kind of mindset and value system that aligned to the values of the consumers that we were trying to win over.
Yeah.
And then it wrote itself from there.
Yeah, there's so much within that. And the first thing that I just want to hit on is let's just talk about personas
Okay.
and audience work. So what you were saying about the audience you guys were targeting was like this whole idea of like progression, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they want to progress, they want to do things, but like, and not necessarily in relation to this campaign, but just in general when it comes to strategy, how do you go from very broad personas, you know, very general statements, for example, like Gen Z loves dogs. So
they do love dogs.
Yeah. So like, let's do something with dogs. You know what I mean? Like, how do you actually start creating personas that feel like your different friends? You know, like I could say that one persona is like one of my friends, Sorianne, and I could define that very specifically. And a campaign for that persona is going to be completely different than a friend like Megan or a friend like Raheem, et cetera, you know? So like, how do you, whether it's within the research when you're talking to these people or just like general desktop research, how do you build personas that actually get you somewhere with a brand in a really defined and specific way?
I'm not this. This is my approach.
Yeah.
Not all planners do it this way.
Yeah.
I weirdly always start with quant. I think
quantitative. Okay.
I always think that you have to understand from a business perspective what is the raw objective facts about the largest swath of consumers that you want to win with, right? Because to your point, there are probably Raheem, Megan, Surianne are archetypes, right? And there are probably 1 million Raheems, 2 million Suriannes, and 1.5 million Megans, right?
Yeah.
So if you understand how many of these archetypes are out there, broadly, quantitatively, like as objectively as you can, age, income level, number, like frequency of use of whatever purchase or product or category that you're in, all of that stuff. I think that's a good foundational starting point. Get yourself and your clients all on the same page about who you want to win with. If you want to win with Megan, our 1.5 million cohort or persona, then let's go talk to some Megans. Let's talk to Megan and understand, okay, yeah, in some like survey data, you talked about like, you know, here you've identified that you're a person who likes dogs or who wants to change the world. You've answered a battery of questions that we take as attitudinal statements or value statements or belief statements. But like, again, you're checking boxes either on paper or online. So like, I want to talk to you and understand the why behind those statements, what actually makes you tick. I think that's the only way to get to a really good persona, because then you're understanding, okay, I know that these people exist out here, like this archetype or this persona exists out in the world. I have strong signal that they share these types of attitudes, values, or beliefs that we think are important in order to link with our brand and that we think are motivating, that we think motivate brand choice for them.
Yeah.
And then you take, and you can go as big or as and expansive with your qual approaches, or as small if you're looking for a gut check. You take the time to actually sit down and talk to these consumers and put definition and color around what makes them tick, what drives those attitudes, values, and beliefs, so that when you're then using that persona to educate clients or partners or educate creatives about who they're talking to, you can help them very easily imagine that consumer in their head.
Yeah, for sure. And even digging deeper into that part though, like when you say you actually sit down with them after getting all of the numbers and the quant, et cetera, how do you even start like structuring a conversation with them to understand why? Because I feel like sometimes when you're interviewing people, you can ask a question, but it's a leading question, you know? So therefore they're going to give you a leading answer. But like they're going to give you an answer back that kind of aligns with what you were trying to get at.
Yeah.
So like, how do you get away from that and make it as like pure as possible?
I think the easiest way to do that, to disconnect yourself from it, is to usually use a third party, right? I mean, we're both strategists. We've all written discussion guides. But I think you're right. The implicit confirmation bias of you trying to write and then interpret the answers that you've gotten, that you've elicited from people is like...
I do that in like daily life too. Like,
oh no, I do the same thing. Listen, it's like we're human beings. It's like, but I'm going to tell you this, you tell me this, right?
Exactly.
It's exactly that.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, you can if you're planning on a budget, and you don't have the opportunity to go to a research house or a research vendor, a third party, then write your own discussion guide. Obviously, have those discussions. Obviously, do your best to analyze the responses and present a picture back to whoever your key stakeholders are as objectively and as dispassionately as possible.
Yeah.
But the gold standard is to go with a trusted research vendor, a trusted research partner, who they're literally, and they will say this in focus groups all the time, which I always find so wild. They're there for a check. They don't care about your brand. They don't care about these people. They're here to ask them questions and elicit truthful responses that can be useful and additive to forming that opinion of that picture of those consumers.
For sure. Third party is the way to go.
It's the way to go.
But like going back to the brand for a second.
Okay.
So Bud Light had a mission to accomplish, and that was really just giving a new POV and brand stance on category, right? But as a strategist, how do you start having those conversations with clients? Maybe for this campaign, it was a little bit easier because they knew that the campaign needed to be redone, it needed to evolve, et cetera. But like, I feel like sometimes being a strategist, you find yourself in muddy water with the client sometimes because they're like, this is our established platform.
Yeah.
And the world loves it. Like the kids love it. Everybody loves it. But then like being on the other side, when you start dissecting that a little bit more, you're like, wait, hold on. Bob and Timmy doesn't love it. You know what I mean? So like, how do you open up the conversation with the client to let them know that like, what is their baby isn't the best baby for right now, and we need to transform or we need to evolve it or we just need to move from where we currently are?
Right. I think that's a great question, actually. So you're right. In the case of Bud Light, this was an easier lift from a strategic perspective because you had clients who were looking to transform, the way they showed up in the world, not just for the the strategic business reasons of how do we recruit new drinkers to the brand, but also because I love these clients. They're some of the smartest and nicest people that I've ever worked with. But I think they fundamentally did not think that the way that they were showing up in the world and the current cultural perception of them that had been built up of all this baggage over time truly reflected who the brand was and who they were as the people behind the brand. Because there's people behind brands, right? So it was easy lift there. Like the horse was already at the water.
Yeah.
When the horse is not at the water, child, that's a mess.
A whole one.
A whole mess. Muddy. And I think it would be hubristic of me to say there's one way to kick off that conversation or that there's one conversation. I think it is a series of... this is where it gets painful. Not painful.
Hard.
Painful. Hard.
Yeah.
Hard.
Bang your head against the wall.
Bang your head against the wall. See ya. Just bang that head. But in those conversations, and you're likely to see it in any category, it's a series of conversations where you hopefully have partners on the client side who are open-minded enough to say, hey, if we look at why the campaign results weren't as effective as they were, was it the creative? Yeah, of course, creative can always be optimized. Was it our placements or our distribution in store? Yeah, that can always be fixed. But is there something more fundamental about what we are standing for or what we're putting out into the world that may be, at best, not as attractive to consumers as our competitor or as our competitive offerings, or at worst, might be actually pushing consumers away?
Yeah.
And I think, especially in instances where a strategist or an agency's POV is that something about this brand is pushing consumers away, it's usually a longer conversation to get marketers who have been working with, X brand for however many years to the point where they're like, something needs to change. And you can't come in at it like, I don't know why I'm pontificating now. You can't come at it like, oh, well, they're dumb. Like, nah, they're humans. Yeah. They're humans. They, things that worked 5 years ago may not work today. They may not work 1 year and they may come back. So there's a lot of risk involved in fundamentally shifting a positioning.
Yeah.
And so like you have to acknowledge their humanity, acknowledge that they have like skin in the game, both with like a lot of emotional investment. They help build this brand.
Yeah.
They have like financial attachments to it. They can't have a wild move cause the brand to sink because they'll be out of jobs.
Yeah.
So acknowledge their humanity and then have the tough conversations over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Until you make headway.
Yeah, and like speaking about the wild move you just mentioned, I also like to think of it sometimes just like in reference of like the gym or like eating. You know, when you go to a trainer and if he was like, you're gonna have to change everything about your life today.
Right.
Cut out everything.
Right.
The alcohol, the going out, the fast food, you would like run the opposite way or like try to find a new trainer.
Right.
And clients will go try to find a new agency.
Right.
You know what I mean? But like if you give it to them in baby steps, like first let's just like set this to the side.
Right.
Like, let's change our social presence a little bit and then lead up, you know, over years of also building trust, you know, with the client. That can kind of like lead to change as well.
1000%.
Yeah. So the tagline of Bud Light was?
It was Bud Light Living. And the living platform, after we went through the exercise of defining, like really unpacking the challenge, which the clients were all, it was, as I said, the clients were very much aware of and bought into. Coming down to this notion of we can appeal and have shared values with these consumers because we're born from progress to be progressive. The decision was like the living platform still worked, but the line evolved from Bud Light Living, which was it still carried panache.
Yeah.
It became Made for Living, and the whole platform was evolved slightly. To like talk to both what the beer was for, but also what these consumers were for. Like fundamentally, these consumers are people who are made for, again, I can imagine these consumers in my mind. Consumers like you who are made for life. They're made to push themselves to their limits at work, push themselves to their limits in their relationships. And also when they go out, they want to let loose and like have the best time possible.
Yeah.
And so the line and the platform expression evolved slightly to speak to that.
And so if that was the line, then what was some of the creative assets that fell from that throughout the campaign?
Kat, I'm really proud of this. At the same time, there was a packaging refresh that was happening for Bud Light. So we went to market with what we call blue blocking. So everything was like bright blue. It started off by infusing this new tonality, this new progressive tonality into all of the copy, into the way that we treated our more standard traditional assets, right? The things, you still have to show consumers that the beer looks good. You have to pour it into a glass. You still have to be on out of home around like places of consumption to like, stay top of mind and salient.
Yeah.
Brilliant basics are brilliant basics. But period. But what was most interesting were some of the ways that it drove the way the brand behaved in the world. One of my favorite examples that was born from this was Bud Light has always been a brand that has a huge footprint. Light beer in general has always had a huge footprint amongst the LGBTQIA plus community. Bud Light, a pretty sizable footprint. And so one of the behaviors that was born of this new positioning was Bud Light really doubling down on not just like showing up, but showing out for the gay community. So like activations at major pride events that were like bespokely designed, not just to be like, hey, we have a float, buy some Bud Light, but to make a pointed statement that was in service and an allyship to the community. And it pulled through from not just like the amazing activations and stunts, there have been multiple over the years, but down to even social copy and the license that was given to the community managers to the license and the freedom that they were given in how they engaged in the space. Yeah. So my favorite example was, the reins were taken off on community managers. We knew that there were going to be trolls who were going to come for the brand for being so progressively progressive behind this community. And when people clapped back at the brand clapped back. The brand was like, absolutely not. Oh, you You don't think it's cool that gay people are drinking the beer? We don't need you. Bye. See you later. Which is again, it's an interesting, slightly aggressive position for a brand to take. Other things that the brand has done. That's a great example of a behavior that led to a non-traditional marketing output. The brand did a film called Underplayed. The brand, again, brilliant basics. Like Bud Light is a beer that you drink in the club, right? That's what we call it, spiritual home. Like usually at festivals, like high energy moments where you're sweating and you really want something cool and refreshing. And we knew that our target consumer, A, that's their spiritual home as well. That's where they want to go and have fun. But B, they're really passionate about the craft around EDM and the performers in that space. And the brand looked for, hey, who's an example of like a progressive, striving, innovative group within this community that's not getting their fair share or their fair shine? And the unlock, and I will credit him, I'll say his name, Neil Blewett, brilliant man, was like, why don't we turn the spotlight on female DJs in the space who like are grinding just as hard, are making just as amazing music, but they're not getting the Calvin Harris billings that they probably should be or could be. So the brand created an entire film that it launched and has streamed on Crave in Canada and I believe Amazon Prime in the States. That was called Underplayed. I think an hour and something minutes runtime, but it was literally a documentary about the women that literally are out here either on their grind or who have already gotten to the top of the game. Their stories, how they got there. So again, like I think a lot of the time we think, oh my God, it's a marketing campaign. It's got to be the funniest 30-second ad ever. No, sometimes it's actual content or it's actual platforming of people who are important in these communities.
I don't think I've ever been on a stage with all women.
You can't be what you can't see. It's really important for women to be represented on stage. I think it sends a message to girls that are interested in doing this.
Yeah, and what was really interesting too about when you were just talking about the occasion of how the brand is consumed, and you were saying it's like in the clubs. A lot of the briefs that I've even come across over the past few weeks is like, we know this is where our brand is consumed. Like we know this is how people use it and who they use it with, et cetera. But we want to extend. Right? Like we don't want to just be known for like the pub or for the club, et cetera. So coming back to like strategy, just within strategy, how do you lead that? You know, how do you guide that? Like what research do you do to figure out like how to extend a brand into a place where it's just not being used?
Right. That's a good question. Like, I think the first place I start with when presented with that scenario or that type of challenge is I was trying to understand what's the question behind the question. Why are we looking for it to extend beyond our current UNA? Is it because we think that there's an unserved market outside of the core consumers that are currently loyal to our brand and using it in a fairly consistent fashion for a fairly consistent a fairly consistent purpose? If that's the case, then yes, let's go find new virgin territory for this brand to conquer and find the best spaces where its current product set or if there's product innovation if there are product innovations coming that the brand can insert itself into and service. Often, though, what I find is sometimes I've gotten briefs across my desk where it's like, we need to conquer new worlds. It's like, what you actually mean is that like consumers in your current world are using you less or switching you out for another brand. Sometimes the job is, sometimes it's a yes, let's do both. Sometimes it's a, no, let's fix this first. And so like I always start there because I think half the time, I'll put it to you this way, the seltzer craze is an example. Somebody came in with a seltzer to the market, to the alcohol category, and then everybody jumped out of their lane and has a seltzer, right? Now, seltzer is declining precipitously, and everybody's like, well, why the heck do I have all these seltzers? Why do I have 3 seltzer brands or seltzer extensions in my portfolio? When what you were actually looking to solve was declining rate of sale in your core competency of beer or insert whatever your alcohol line is here.
Yep.
And so I think it is about striking that balance between, you get the point. Am I solving a problem, or am I capitalizing on an opportunity? If you can answer those questions, then you can make a decision on where to go next.
Yeah. One of my first managers ever, one of the biggest lines that like always stays in my head is just like dig deeper in everything. Like whether you're like creating your brief in the research phase and you need to dig deeper into like why a consumer said something, or even just like when it starts at the initial ask of a client, like dig deeper to understand like why are we actually even doing this before we just go off and clap our hands and do it.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Well, moving to the last part of our conversation, just from all that you've talked about with the campaign and the process that you went through with Bud Light, but then also all of the other gems that you've dropped throughout, what are 2 to 3 key takeaways or gems that you could give our audience?
One, listen to your clients. I like truly listen to your clients. Like my biggest pet peeve, the easiest way to really tick me off if you're a planner, a creative, an account person, is to instantly dismiss a whole other human being as foolish or dumb. You hear it all the time in agency.
It's easy,
Client's dumb, they don't get it. I'm like, no, they disagree with you. Listen to your client. Like, listen to what they're saying. Ask, to your point, ask them questions. Like, this brief arrived on your desk in this way, right? It beggars belief that there is not a backstory to that brief. If you ask what the backstory is, you get all the keys to the kingdom. Like, whose manager is driving, who's pushing for X or Y thing in this brief? What are the real problems that they're facing that they didn't put on paper that like, well, if you'd written that down, I would come back with a completely different answer. Like, why did you tell me that? Let's change your brief. So listen to, and when it comes to feedback, like, again, it's the same thing. Like, what's the question behind the question, or the push behind the push when they're trying to push a creative campaign in a certain direction? What's making them uncomfortable? Ask those questions. Being dismissive is the sign of a lazy individual. Second tidbit, read the comment section. I think I said this to somebody before. Like, it's not, look, if you have the time to pull your phone out and comment negatively or positively on any article or piece of content out there, even if it's on Instagram, like, you are really motivated. Most people doom scroll through everything. So like, as a baseline, let's stipulate that. It's people who are very pro-positive or pro-negative in one way or the other. So it's not a scientific way to get a gauge on anything. But if you can take that big grain of salt and read how things are playing out, how a 30-second ad from a competitor is received, or how a new product launch is being received, or how a new album drop is being received, you'll get a lot of clues about what's working in culture, what's not working in culture. It's not perfect, but it could be directional, and you can figure out ways to dig in from there.
Your last one. Your last gem.
Oh my gosh, my last gem. I've had to be reminding myself about this, and it's something I said at the top, and I'm glad I said it at the top because it's become my watchword for this year. Your fundamental job as a strategist is to not just solve problems. Yes, that is like the core of what we do, or at least lead the charge to solving problems. We never solve them on our own. But fundamentally, your job as a strategist is to be useful, right? If you're sitting in a big boardroom, you're being useful to a CEO or a CMO or a CFO in helping them unravel the big Gordian knots that they have to deal with and guide the ship for a corporate strategy. If you're in a creative agency, your job is to be useful first to client to help them get to a decision, and then to creative to help them shape the idea. So ask yourself, is the thing I'm going to say, is the deck I'm about to write, because sometimes we do a lot of proactive nonsense, is the extra flourish that I'm putting into this brief, is it useful or is it not? And if it's not, don't do it.
Yeah. Cut it.
Cut it.
It's so hard, though.
It's so hard. It's
because you really think it's right.
You think it's right.
This is going to hit differently. But it doesn't.
Especially when you have planners like, it doesn't. Especially when you have planners like me, like you're good. You're very good. Gosh. You're efficient and concise. Me, I'm long-winded. I want to talk and I want to put all the thoughts down on paper. I want to sometimes do less.
Less is more.
Yeah.
Less is more. Well, thank you, JD. This was a useful conversation. There were so many gems dropped. Seriously, you're actually like my favorite person. Every single class that I teach, and even if I'm not even in advertising in general, like if I'm just talking about business or like people, I always bring you up. And like all of my students can like vouch for that because I mean, just going back to your time when we were both at Ogilvy, like you got on all the big sexy briefs and like all of the big accounts that we had at that time, you know? And I think I think it's not just because you're smart, because there's like a lot of smart people, you know what I mean? But obviously like your brain is different. You're smart, but you're also just such a joy to be around and like to work with. And having you as a manager was like a highlight, you know? And I learned so much about like even my own managerial style now, like managing a team and interns, et cetera, from you, and just like how compassionate you are and how you actually listen to like what I wanted and what I thought. And I think like so many times in strategy, it's hard because you're like, I'm literally putting my thoughts out on paper and your thoughts are like who you are. It's not just like you're drawing something, like, you know what I mean? It's like truly who you are. And that can be intimidating. And when you get feedback that's like, nah, this is stupid. Like, or they just take the brief and do it themselves. You know, you're kind of just like stuck in like just an area of stupidity, you know what I mean? And you can't get out of it. But like you always took the time to like let me know like how I could improve something or like how I could be better. And like that's the same exact style that I take with like everyone who's on my teams. So thank you for coming.
That was too kind. That was too much.
No,
I was just trying to keep up, my dear. I was just trying to keep up.
Gosh. Okay.
No, it's the truth. It's the truth. I'm like, no shade.
I accept it. I accept it all. Thank you.
The brain on this one. The brain on this one.
And that is the end of The Invisible Thread. Thanks for watching and see you next time.